What's up everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving into a very specific and highly requested gaming test. We're looking at Call of Duty Warzone, running on the Lenovo IdeaCentre. Now, this isn't just a standard benchmark video. Today, we are putting the Intel Core i5 processor and the NVIDIA RTX 3050 OEM graphics card to the absolute ultimate test. But before we drop into the Warzone, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. The specific rig we are testing today is running on only 8 GB of system RAM. If you are a PC gamer, or if you spend any time reading the forums on Reddit, you already know that 8 GB of RAM in today's gaming landscape is considered the bare minimum. And for a massively unoptimized, resource-heavy game like Call of Duty Warzone, 8 GB usually spells disaster. Players constantly complain about terrible stuttering, horrible texture pop-ins, and unplayable 1% lows when trying to run this game on lower-end hardware. So, bringing a budget-friendly Lenovo pre-built desktop into this chaotic environment felt like a massive risk. I honestly didn't know if the system was going to crash, or if it would actually give us a playable experience. So here was the plan. I decided to test every single graphical preset, but instead of starting at the bottom and working my way up, I decided to do something completely crazy. I cranked everything up to the absolute maximum right out of the gate. We're starting with the Extreme Settings preset. I am going to be completely honest with you guys. When I clicked on Extreme, I expected the game to crash. I expected the Lenovo to overheat, spin its fans up to 1,000,000 RPM, and give me a cinematic 15 frames per second. You do not buy an i5 with an RTX 3050 and 8 gigs of RAM to play modern AAA games on extreme settings. It just doesn't make sense. I loaded into the match, the countdown finished, and the match began. And surprisingly, unbelievably, Extreme gave me the absolute best overall performance out of all the modes we tested today. Now, let me be very clear. I am not talking about the highest average frame rate. On Extreme, we were locked in at around 45 to 55 frames per second. For hardcore competitive gamers, that might sound a little low. But in terms of pure, unadulterated playability, it was absolutely flawless. The frame pacing was perfectly flat. Every single frame was delivered at exactly the right time. The micro-stutters? They were completely non-existent. The sudden drops in frame rate when entering a new area? Gone. Aiming down sights was snappy, tracking enemies across the map was incredibly consistent, and I actually managed to secure a few solid kills and make it to the final circle without a single hardware-related death. So, how is this possible? Why does maxing out the graphics make a budget PC run the game better? It all comes down to bottlenecks. By maximizing the graphical fidelity, we shifted the entire workload completely away from the struggling Intel i5 CPU and completely away from that highly limited 8 GB of system memory. We forced the game engine to utilize the RTX 3050's dedicated 8 GB of VRAM to its absolute maximum capacity. Because the GPU was running at 99% utilization, it became the sole bottleneck of the system. And in PC gaming, a GPU bottleneck is the best kind of bottleneck you can have. It provides a consistent, predictable output. The system RAM was no longer frantically trying to swap files back and forth because the graphics card was holding all those massive, beautiful, extreme textures directly on its own memory chips. The Lenovo IdeaCentre chassis also did a surprisingly good job of keeping things cool during this stress test. Even after 10 minutes of running the game on Extreme, the GPU temperatures never exceeded 75 degrees Celsius. The airflow inside that compact case was handling the heat, and the system never thermally throttled. But what happens when we start lowering the graphics? Does it get better? Let's step it down to the high preset. On the high preset, the game still looked absolutely beautiful. The reflections on the water, the detailed shadows inside the buildings, it still felt like a true next-generation Call of Duty experience. Because we lowered the graphical burden just a little bit, our average frame rate actually took a slight jump. We were now landing right around 55 to 60 frames per second. But here's the catch. While the average frame rate was higher, the game actually started to feel just a tiny bit less smooth. By decreasing the graphical load, we were slowly shifting the heavy lifting away from our graphics card and starting to hand it back over to our struggling system RAM. The micro-stutters weren't terrible yet, but if you pay close attention to the frame time graph, you can see tiny spikes that just weren't there on the extreme settings. It was still highly playable, but the perfect illusion of smoothness was starting to crack. Next, we backed out to the menu and dropped the graphics down to the medium or balanced preset. Dropping back into the map, the visual downgrade was immediately noticeable. The lighting looked a bit flatter, the edges of the buildings were starting to get that jagged, pixelated look, and the operator models lost a lot of their fine detail. Performance-wise, the average frame rate jumped up again. We were now sitting comfortably around 65 to 75 frames per second, but the stuttering was now becoming a real, tangible problem. During intense firefights, especially when multiple players were throwing smoke grenades or calling in precision airstrikes, that dreaded hitching returned in full force. The 8 gigabytes of system RAM was now officially struggling to keep all those assets loaded in real time. The RTX 3050 OEM was essentially going to sleep, outputting frames faster than the CPU and RAM could actually process the data. The system was now completely out of balance. And that brings us to our final test, the low settings preset. Naturally, when you have an entry-level graphics card like the RTX 3050 and highly limited system RAM, your very first instinct is to drop every single graphical setting to the absolute minimum. You want to turn off shadows, you want to lower texture resolution, and you want to disable ambient occlusion. You do this because you want frames. You want the highest number possible in that top left corner of your screen for a competitive advantage. So we dropped in on low. The plane flew over, I picked my drop spot, and we jumped. Instantly, the disaster began. On low settings, the game was technically pushing a fantastic average frame rate. We were hovering around the 80 to 90 FPS mark most of the time, but the actual experience of playing the game was completely ruined by aggressive, constant micro-stutters. Every single time I turned a corner, every time I aimed down the sights of my weapon to engage an enemy, the game hitched. It literally froze for a fraction of a second. But in a game like Warzone, a fraction of a second is the difference between winning a gunfight and going straight to the gulag. Why does this happen? Well, as we explained earlier, on low graphical settings, the game relies heavily on your CPU and your system RAM to push those frames as fast as possible. The RTX 3050 is doing almost nothing, but because we only have 8 gigs of system RAM, the Lenovo IdeaCentre was completely choking. The CPU was desperately waiting for data, the RAM was completely maxed out at 100% usage, and the game simply could not keep up with the fast-paced movement. The 1% lows were absolutely atrocious. It was, quite frankly, a miserable gaming experience. It is a massive testament to how important it is to actually test your hardware. If I had just listened to the conventional wisdom of competitive gamers, I would have left the game on low settings and suffered through a stuttery, unplayable mess. I would have blamed the computer and said the Lenovo simply wasn't powerful enough. But by experimenting and pushing the machine beyond what it was supposedly designed for on extreme, we found the magic sweet spot. We found the exact configuration that bypassed the hardware limitations of the OEM build. So we've seen the gameplay, we've seen the numbers. We went from a perfectly smooth, locked-in cinematic experience on extreme to an absolute stuttering mess on low. Which one do you prefer? Are you the type of player who will sacrifice everything for a few extra average frames on low, even if it means dealing with the constant stuttering? Or are you like me, where you'd rather cap the frame rate a bit lower on extreme and enjoy a perfectly smooth, beautiful-looking game where your shots actually connect? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below. I really want to know how you guys configure your own rigs for Warzone. Also, if you're rocking a Lenovo IdeaCentre or any other pre-built with an RTX 3050, let me know what kind of performance you're getting with your specific setup. If this video helped you optimize your setup, or if you just enjoyed watching me push this budget rig to its absolute limits, hit that like button. It really helps out the channel. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive hardware benchmarks and gaming tests just like this one. We have a lot more hardware to test and a lot more frames to chase. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.